Episode 1, Where They Still Kneel. There was no map, just a trail of names, half erased, just pages that folded in the book like mouths that had whispered too long in the dark. But Mara followed them anyway, because something in her blood itched, like faith trying to remember its shape. She found the first door beneath a forgotten city, not beneath a church, beneath a bakery. The cellar stairs led deeper than they should have. Stone became bone. Moss gave way to ash. And when she reached the bottom, there was no altar, no priest, just silence and rows of kneeling figures. Dozens, veiled, unmoving. Their robes were stitched with symbols too old for theology and too exact for accident. They did not turn when she entered. They did not speak. They knew she had come, knew what she carried, knew what she had become. And across the far wall, painted in something darker than shadow, we never closed. We only became quieter than the world. One of them stood, a woman, no face visible, just breath beneath the veil, steady and slow. She extended her hand. Mara hesitated, not from fear, but from recognition. She had seen this woman before, in visions, in flames, in a mirror that once cracked when Mara spoke a forbidden name. Her name had been erased from every gospel, but her presence hummed like a psalm beneath every silence. And now, she spoke without sound. The church you left was not the first. It was a copy. The room shifted. Mara blinked. The kneeling women became shadows. The candles blinked out, then returned in new positions. And beneath her feet, a sigil glowed. Not a cross, not a fish, but of an eye crying ink. The book in her hands shuddered, opened, and wrote one line without her. Those who were never heard built their own sanctuary in the hush. The veiled woman led Mara deeper, through corridors of scripture carved into flesh, through prayer rooms where the walls wept oil, through chapels made of discarded relics, the halos of fallen nuns, chalices melted into mirrors, and at the end, a door, small, wooden, breathing. The woman stopped, spoke finally, her voice like stone turning to velvet. Behind this is not God, not salvation, not judgment. She turned her veiled face to Mara. Behind this is what the church tried to forget. Mara opened it, and inside, a choir, all veiled, all headless, and yet they sang, not with mouths, with memory, with a sound so ancient. The book in her arms tore itself open to make space. And on the final page that night, this was written in her own blood. Asterisk, you are not in a church. You are in a womb of voices, waiting to be born again through you. Asterisk, Episode 2, The Priest Without Eyes. He had no name. Not anymore. Not after Rome took it. Not after he saw the chapter they burned and lived to speak of it. Now they called him simply the priest who looked too long. Mara was led to him through 7 doors, each heavier than the last. The nuns who walked her down the stone corridor did not speak. One of them carried a bowl of salt, the other ashes. They poured both across the threshold before opening the final door, and inside, he sat, alone, robe torn, hands folded over a book that had no title. His eyes were gone, not gouged, not burned, simply gone, as if heaven had retrieved them, as if what he saw had never been meant to leave the page. But he turned toward Mara when she entered, and he smiled. I thought you'd come sooner. His voice was soft, like broken vellum, like a candle learning how to flicker again. Mara said nothing at first. She didn't know how to greet someone who once read a prophecy and paid with sight, but the book in her hand began to hum, and the blind priest flinched. Yes, he whispered. I know that breath. He reached forward, fingers tracing the air with surgical reverence, and then landed on the cover. He froze, and then whispered, You opened it, didn't you? The page that was meant to stay folded. Mara nodded. He laughed, not cruel, but tired. Then you've already begun to bleed what I once saw. She stepped closer. What did you see? She asked. He inhaled like he was swallowing memory, then said, The first sentence God regretted writing. He told her of a time before cathedrals, when the word was not printed, but spoken into the veins of stone and water, when women wrote scriptures in caves with blood drawn from their own dreams, when angels did not descend, but listened quietly to voices rising from wombs. And he said, then came the church, and they could not bear the sound of something holier than their version of holiness. So they blinded me with light. Mara opened her book. It flipped to a blank page, and wrote without ink. He did not go blind. He was unburdened of sight. The priest placed one hand over the page, and whispered something too soft to be heard. But the book responded, burning one phrase into the stone floor beneath him. What was erased in ink has begun to return through skin. He faced Mara, empty eyes toward her heartbeat. You are not here to be blessed. No, she said, you are not here to confess. She shook her head. He leaned in. Then let me give you what I was never allowed to finish. From beneath his robe, he pulled a single page, wrinkled, scorched at the edges, still warm. He offered it to her. As she touched it, the book took it in, like a breath it had waited lifetimes to inhale. And from its spine came a whisper Mara would never forget. The church never closed, because the lie never finished burning. Episode 3, the baptism beneath the floorboards. They led her in silence, not through a hallway, through a hymn no one sang, only breathed. The sound came from their robes, from the way their feet kissed the stone, from the oil that dripped from unseen ceilings above them, warm and thick like melted scripture. Each step whispered, not to cleanse, to awaken. The chapel above had long been abandoned, but beneath it, beneath rotting pews and a pulpit that no longer remembered its sermons, there was a trapdoor, sealed with wax, etched with 13 names. Mara recognized two. One she had written in the book. The other was hers. They opened it slowly. The air rose, not stale, but heavy, like it had been praying without pause for centuries, and only now exhaled. A staircase descended into the dark, not made of wood, not of stone, of bone, carved and polished. Holy not because it was sanctified, but because it had survived. At the bottom, a room with no cross, only a basin, wide, deep, black. It did not hold water. It held voice. She heard it before she saw it. A sound like every word she'd ever swallowed boiling to the surface. The basin was full of liquid memory, thick, warm, and red as prophecy. One of the veiled nuns approached her and held out a cloth, not for modesty, for blindness. You must not see yourself when it begins, she said. Why? The nun did not answer, but Mara understood. She was not here to remember what she had been. She was here to remember what had spoken through her before she was born. They wrapped the cloth over her eyes, guided her to the basin, and lowered her in. The moment her skin touched it, the liquid whispered, not to her ears, to her blood. She felt syllables slide through her veins, opening veins of memory. A child singing scripture from inside the womb. A nun with no tongue humming the Beatitudes backward. A mother writing her own gospel in milk and blood before the church burned her. And beneath all of it, the truth the Vatican never wrote down. That some baptisms were not for purification. They were for preservation. Mara sank deeper. The voice grew louder, until it was not one voice, but hundreds, crying, laughing, repeating a line over and over in a tongue her bones remembered. We were not lost. We were hidden. We were not silent. We were sealed. She gasped. The liquid filled her mouth, but it was not thick. It was language, and it did not drown her. It rewrote her, letter by letter. From within, when they pulled her out, the cloth over her eyes had turned red, not from bleeding, but from seeing. They removed it. Her vision shimmered. The world no longer looked like stone and shadow. It looked like unwritten verses. And at the far end of the room, burned into the floor beneath the basin, a message waited. She is no longer writing the gospel. She is becoming the part they never dared to read. Episode 4, the bell that rang from underground. It rang at the 6th hour, but not from above, from below, from a place no tower reached. No rope hung, no hand touched. A single note. Low, hollow, heavy. It didn't echo through air. It echoed through bone. Mara heard it in her teeth, in her blood, in the quiet tremble of the book as it lay shut beside her. And every nun in the underground sanctuary stopped what they were doing, not in fear, in recognition. They turned their veiled faces toward the floor. One whispered, voice dry as forgotten parchment, "It is time to unseal the layer." The walls responded, not with movement, with breath. Dust rose from cracks that hadn't existed the night before. Symbols pulsed beneath the stone like veins awakening. And from the center of the room, a circle of old tiles twisted open, revealing a spiral staircase carved not by tools, but by fingers in prayer. The air changed. It didn't smell of death. It smelled of memory, so old it forgot how to rot. Mara descended. The air grew warmer, not from fire, but from presence. And the bell rang again, closer, deeper, and this time it brought images, visions that didn't pass through eyes, but through marrow. A woman giving birth inside a confessional, a priest bearing a gospel beneath a child's coffin, a choir of mute boys humming a note that cracked the paint off every wall, and below all of it, a bell made not of iron but of mouths, sealed, welded, whispering. When Mara reached the chamber, she found it, suspended in the air, a bell with no clapper, no chain, no seam. It should not have rung, and yet it had, and beneath it, an altar with no carvings, only flesh, pale, breathing, like someone had buried a saint alive beneath it, and they were still praying with their chest. The book pulsed against her side, opened itself. Pages flipped until one burned black, then stopped. A sentence wrote itself. Asterisk, the bell does not call the faithful. It reminds the buried they are still being heard. Asterisk, Mara approached. The bell hummed softly now, like a lullaby made of guilt, and from the altar a single hand emerged, thin, old, but firm in its movement. It held a key, bone white, not to a door, but to a name, etched into the spine of the bone, barely visible under the candlelight. Mara, her knees gave way. The bell began to tremble above her, and in one long final toll, it spoke, not in sound, in knowing. This was not the first time you were chosen. This is simply the first time you remembered. The nuns lifted her. They did not ask what she saw. They knew. The book sealed itself for the first time in days, and the echo of the bells settled not into silence, but into her heartbeat. Episode 5, the confessional that heard her before she spoke. It had no door, only a frame, twisted, crooked, as if the wood itself had tried to deny what it had once contained. They led her to it in silence. No candles, no crosses, no priest, just a hollow space, where thousands of sins had once clung to the walls like smoke. Mara hesitated, not because she was afraid to confess, but because she knew this time she wasn't the one speaking. She stepped inside. The seat welcomed her like a memory, warm, alive, too familiar. The air smelled of wax, salt, and something older, like a throat that had never stopped bleeding. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The wood around her sighed, a sound so deep it cracked the silence like glass. And then, from the other side of the screen, a breath, then a voice, but not one made of sound, one made of knowing. It spoke not into her ears, but into the back of her skull. Your blood has already confessed. Now, let us show you what remembers. The screen between them turned black, not with darkness, with image. It became a mirror of moments not hers, and yet utterly, devastatingly hers. A girl kneeling, hands bound, mouth sealed shut with a rosary threaded through her lips. Above her, a priest reading a prayer no longer written in any book. A prayer that did not absolve. A prayer that transferred guilt. And Mara felt it, not as witness, as vessel. She tasted ash. She saw her own hands over the girl's mouth, not as herself, but as every hand that ever silenced another. She tried to move. The booth held her, not cruelly, reverently, The voice returned. You carry the memory of silence, but the church never repents for what it silences. It archives it. A drawer slid open beside her. Dust bloomed. Inside, pages, not handwritten, bled. Each one a confession never spoken aloud, written by skin, pressed into parchment that had once been human. And the top one read, I did not lie. They simply refused to let truth live in a woman's voice. The confessional shook. The wall behind her cracked open. Not a secret passage. A wound. And from it emerged a breath of cold that carried with it a final phrase. Asterisk. You were not meant to be forgiven. You were meant to be remembered. Asterisk. Mara stepped out. The frame of the booth collapsed behind her. Not destroyed. Freed. The book in her arms opened to a blank page. And without ink, it wrote, Asterisk Chapter 5. The church that heard too much and built walls instead of memory. Asterisk. Episode 6. The altar that refused to hold sacrifice. It stood untouched, in a chamber older than faith, beneath a cathedral that had long been burned to memory. No blood, no chalice, no veil, just a slab of black stone, smooth as still water, curved slightly upward at its center, as if waiting to cradle something not yet born. Mara entered alone. The book stayed outside. It would not follow. It trembled in her hands at the threshold, and when she tried to step forward with it, its spine snapped shut, a warning, or a bow. So she laid it gently on the floor and walked forward with only breath and bone. The altar pulsed, not visibly, not loudly, but she felt it in the soles of her feet, a heartbeat far older than hers. She knelt before it, unsure why. It didn't demand reverence, but it deserved it, and when her hand hovered above the surface, the stone whispered without sound, Do not bleed for me. I remember too much. She touched it, and instantly, her vision buckled. The room dissolved. She stood, now in 1,000 places at once. In a chapel mid-execution, where a woman screamed and no one listened. In a desert monastery, where an altar was built from stolen gravestones. In a hidden grove where girls were made to pray until their voices cracked like glass. In each vision, a sacrifice was made. In none of them was it holy. The altar shuddered beneath her palm, and it began to write, not with chalk, with memory. Lines formed across its surface, like veins beneath translucent skin. Names, dates, words never spoken aloud. Asterisks, they offered their blood, but no one ever asked if I wanted it. Asterisk, Mara's knees weakened. She leaned into the stone, felt its sorrow, its exhaustion, its refusal, and then a thought, not hers, rose into her mind like incense burned in secret. They built me to be holy, but they used me to justify forgetting. A single drop of blood fell from Mara's nose. Unplanned, unwelcomed, it hit the altar, and instead of absorbing it, the stone rejected it. It hissed, cracked, pushed the blood away, like a body expelling poison. And on its surface, a final sentence carved itself in flame. I was not made to hold sacrifice. I was made to hold memory that no longer fits inside the dead. When she stepped back, the altar stilled, and from beneath it, a hum rose, low, ancient and unfinished. She looked to the door. The book had opened on its own. A single page glowed. It read, Let no one bleed in my name again. Let them remember instead. Episode 7. The candle that wouldn't go out. It was waiting for her. In the smallest room. No door. Just an arch carved into the stone like a sigh held too long. Inside, no altar. No icons. No cross. Just a single candle. Unmoving. Unflickering. Lit. They told her it had been burning for over 300 years. No wick. No wax. Just a flame. And a base made of bone. Carved with a name that had been erased from every scripture, every hymn, every sermon. Leora. They said it was the name of the first woman who dared speak scripture as if she had authored it. They burned her, but the flame did not follow her into death. It stayed, because it wasn't hers. It was a sentence she never finished. Mara entered alone. The flame did not flicker. It leaned toward her, as if it had been inhaling for centuries, waiting for a soul soft enough to listen. She did not kneel. She sat, as one might before a dying relative who was still trying to speak. And the candle began. It did not speak in sound. It spoke in warmth. It pulsed. Each flicker against her cheek translated into thought. Not visions, not voices. Remembrance. She saw a child mouthing prayers beneath the floorboards. A woman writing scripture on her skin, so it could not be taken. A choir of widows humming a forbidden psalm backwards, so the men wouldn't understand. And then, Leora, standing in a church that wasn't built yet, speaking a line that had no place in liturgy. He did not choose me. I chose the voice that was never afraid to carry him without permission. The candle flared. For the first time in centuries, the flame danced, and Mara felt it inside her chest. A match struck against bone. The book outside the room opened itself. Pages fluttered in panic, but could not enter. This was not their chapter. This was older than them. The flame tilted forward, and a drop of wax, if it was wax, fell onto Mara's hand. It did not burn. It wrote one line across her palm. One word. Finish. She understood. The flame could not go out until the sentence Leora died for was completed. Mara opened her mouth, and without knowing how, spoke the rest. And if he speaks through me now, it is not blasphemy. It is return. The room exhaled. The candle did not extinguish, but it bowed, as if finally heard, as if the silence could soften. And in its glow, Mara saw the wall behind it bloom with ash-white script. The light is not here to guide. It is here to remember what darkness never dared to swallow. Episode 8. The choir that was buried standing. There was no grave marker, no plaque, no names, only silence, so thick it pressed against the skin, and a doorway carved into stone, not by hands, but by voices that refused to die quietly. The sisters called it La Boca de la Tierra, the mouth of the earth. They warned Mara, if you stay too long, you'll begin to hum. She thought it was metaphor. It wasn't. They brought her just before midnight. The air was still, too still, like something below was holding its breath, waiting for the door to open. And when it did, there was no stench, no rot, just a warmth, not of the living, of memory that hadn't cooled. She descended alone. Each step deeper felt like a century. And when she reached the chamber, she saw them. Not coffins, not bones, figures, dozens of women, petrified, mouths open, eyes lifted, standing in rows like they had been posed for eternity. But no sculptor had shaped them. They had become this themselves. Mara froze. Their mouths weren't screaming. They were singing. And even now, stone-choked, fossilized, she could feel it. The echo of melody not yet finished. It vibrated through the floor, through her ribs, through the air itself. A hymn too old for language, too beautiful to be allowed, too dangerous to be forgotten. The book she carried burned against her side. It flipped open, pages thrashed like wings, and on one of them, fresh blood wrote itself into shape. They were buried standing because their voices refused to kneel. She walked between them slowly, each face a relic, each mouth an open question, each hand lifted as if still mid-verse. And though they could not breathe, she heard the song, not with ears, with blood, and it said, "We did not want to be saints. We only wanted to be heard." A wind moved through the chamber, but there was no wind, only the memory of lungs. And Mara, without knowing why, began a hum. A single note, steady, thin, true, and around her, the stone bodies did not shift, but the dust at their feet began to rise, as if each grain had remembered who it once was. Then, from the far wall, a panel cracked, fell open. Inside, a scroll, wrapped in linen, still warm. She opened it. A hymn written in a woman's hand, signed, Leora before the burning. And at the bottom, one sentence, faint but carved deep, Asterisk. If our voices were never holy, why did the earth still remember our pitch? Asterisk. Mara stepped back. The chamber fell silent, but not empty, and when she emerged above ground, her breath came out as song, a note she had never learned, that had never been taught, but had always been waiting in her. And the book, finally still, whispered one line. Asterisk. Some churches echo because they are hollow. Others echo because the dead are still singing. Asterisk. Episode 9. The pulpit that refused to rise. They had built the church upside down. The roof was beneath the earth. The floor open to the sky. It wasn't design. It was defiance. A mirror of faith built by hands who had grown tired of being silenced from the top down. And at the center of this reversed sanctuary, the pulpit, sunken, silent, refusing. No one had ever stood upon it, not for lack of trying. Many had stepped forward, raised their voices, recited prayers, but the wood never rose. The stone beneath it never yielded, as if it were waiting, not for truth said by the right voice. Mara was brought there at dusk. No torches, no candles, only the breath of the underground, and the memory of sermons never heard. The nuns did not speak. They only gestured, downward, toward the pit where the pulpit lay buried like a heart that refused to beat too soon. She approached it slowly, not out of fear, but reverence. The book in her hands trembled. Its pages fluttered wildly, then stopped, open to a blank sheet. The last one. It waited, not for ink, for something older than ink. Mara stood before the pulpit. It remained still, but beneath it, she heard something stir, with groaning, stone breathing, and then a voice, not hers, not human, just this. Asterisk. We do not rise for words. We rise for memory spoken without apology. Asterisk. She stepped closer, her feet on the cold spiral of forgotten sermons, and she spoke. Not a prayer, not a quote, not a declaration, just a sentence. Soft, cracked. You burned them before they could finish their first sentence. The pulpit shifted, a shiver, a breath, and the earth beneath her pulsed, like a wound reopening. Mara laid her hand on the edge. The wood was warm, too warm. She closed her eyes, and from her lips came a voice she didn't recognize, but that lived in her blood. Asterisk. I am not here to speak like you. I am here to speak like the ones you buried standing. Asterisk. The pulpit groaned. The stone cracked. And slowly, it began to rise. Not to platform, not to elevate, but to meet her, as if the structure itself bowed. As if it, too, had waited long enough to hear the line no church had dared record. Asterisk. Let the word become flesh, but this time let it become her. Asterisk. She stood upon it. The book snapped shut. No one clapped. No one spoke. But beneath her feet, the ground hummed, not with power, with recognition. And carved into the stone rim of the pulpit's base, a line appeared, smoking as if written by breath. Asterisk. She does not preach. She remembers aloud. Asterisk. Episode 10. The sanctuary that ate its own keys. They didn't take her there. She found it, or rather, it let her find it, at the end of a hall with no name, behind 7 veils of incense that smelled like salt, ink, and burnt lilies. A wall of stone, plain, cold, unmarked, and yet breathing. She felt it before she saw it. The pressure in the air, the hum behind her teeth, the pulse in the floor like a heart buried too deep to die. She reached out. The stone rippled. And there, in the center of the wall, a keyhole, but no key, and no door, just a mouth carved into the rock, half swallowed, sealed tight. Around it an inscription. Asterisk. Do not knock. This sanctuary is not locked. It is ashamed. Asterisk. Mara knelt before it, not to pray, to listen. The book at her side flipped open, frantic, pages fluttering, gasping, but it would not enter. It knew this place. It had come from here. She placed her hand over the stone mouth. It was warm. It exhaled, A whisper passed through her skin into her bones. I once held a choir so pure. They sang in a language only grief could pronounce. She whispered back, not knowing what she said. Then why are you sealed? The answer came slow, like a memory climbing out of a tomb, because they sang truth, and the church wanted silence louder than salvation. Mara closed her eyes. She thought of every room she'd walked through, every altar that remembered too much, every woman whose name had never reached the stained glass. And without speaking, she remembered aloud the women, the children, the buried choir, the priest who saw too much, the book that bled, and the sanctuary shivered. Then the wall cracked, not split, opened. From within, a sliver of darkness revealed, not black, too old to be color, and from inside, a soft light, warm and aching. She stepped in, and there, at the center of the sanctuary, a pool, still, silver, silent, floating above it, a key, but not of metal, of hair, of nail, of memory braided into shape. She reached for it. It lowered into her hand, like it had been waiting centuries to come home. The pool whispered, asterisk, you do not unlock this place. You unlock what it dared to forget. Asterisk, she turned to leave, but the doorway was gone, not closed, absorbed, and on the wall where she had entered, the final sentence wrote itself in fireless flame. Asterisk, a sanctuary that ate its keys, was never afraid of being opened. It was afraid no one would ever come back ready to remember. Asterisk, episode 11. The final saint was a girl without a grave. Her name was never spoken, not in mass, not in prayer, not even in secret, because to say her name was to remember that someone like her had ever existed, and the church could not risk that. Mara found him beneath a pew carved from bone. No candle had touched it. No dust had dared cover it. It waited on brittle parchment, words written in two hands. One delicate, wavering, hopeful. The other abrupt, violent, interrupted. A song unfinished. A life unraveled mid-note. At the top of the page, no title, just a phrase, for she who never laid down. And beneath it, a single sentence written in faded ink. She sang until they burned the air from her lungs. Mara sat before the parchment. The book trembled in her lap, refused to open, as if even it was afraid of what would happen. When this song found breath again, she touched the first line and whispered the note aloud. It rang, not around her, inside her. Her ribs ached, her lungs warmed, and something deep in her throat loosened. Not a voice, not memory, inheritance. She read the second line, and her fingertips burned, not with pain, with reformation. The skin beneath her nails shimmered, not golden, not divine, just new, as if something forgotten had slipped back into her cells. She read the third line, and her breath caught, because this one had never been finished. Just a phrase. I was not chosen by heaven, but by... Then silence. A tear marked the end of the page. Not an ink blot, a final breath written in salt. Mara closed her eyes, and without knowing why, she finished the line. By the silence that feared me, the room darkened. The candle behind her flickered, not because of wind, but because the air recognized her. And in the wall before her, a shape appeared. A girl, not ghost, not vision, just light, standing. Her feet never touched the floor. Her lips never moved. But Mara heard her sing. A tune no choir would ever dare echo. A melody the church had tried to bury without grave, without record, without ritual. But here it was. Here she was. The book finally opened. Not to write, to listen. Pages fluttered, not as if panicked, but as if bowing. And as Mara repeated the final verse aloud, her voice changed. Low, round, older than her years. It wasn't possession. It was permission. When the song ended, the light faded, but the girl did not vanish. She stepped forward and placed her hand on Mara's chest. and whispered into her skin, "Let the body be forgotten. Let the melody be reborn." And with that, she entered her, not as spirit, as him. Outside, the bells rang, not from towers, from within stone itself, and carved beneath Mara's seat, in fresh letters no hand had written, "The final saint has returned, not to be worshipped, but to finish what was never allowed to begin." Episode 12, The Mass Without Witnesses. The chapel had no walls, just breath, no altar, just earth, no pews, just footprints that hadn't faded, because the souls who left them never did. They brought her at twilight, but she was not the first to arrive. There were no invitations, no vestments, no script, and yet every stone knew, every shadow leaned in, and the wind held itself like a choir about to remember a note buried under too much doctrine. At the center of the clearing, a circle of ash, not from fire, from memory that refused to vanish clean. Inside it, 13 stones, carved with no names, only a single word on each. I was here, and you still do not know what we left behind. Mara stepped inside. The book didn't follow. It lay outside the circle, trembling like it finally found a silence it could not write over. She did not speak. She did not kneel. She simply breathed, and the earth breathed back, slow, wide, timeless. And then the mass began. No bell rang, no voice called out, but something in the center shifted. Not air, presence. Figures appeared, barely visible. Women, men, children, nuns without veils, priests without faces, saints that had never been canonized. They stood in a circle around her, each holding something sacred, not objects, wounds, scars that glowed, memories that hummed, and eyes that remembered everything that was taken from them and forgave none of it. The mass unfolded not in gesture, but in knowing, a shared grief, a collective hymn of unfinished lives. And Mara did not preach, did not cry, did not fall. She simply opened her arms and whispered, "You are not gone. You were just never seen." The ground beneath her shook, but not violently, like a body waking from centuries of stillness. And from that tremble, a voice emerged, not above her, not below, within. Asterisk, this is not communion. This is restoration. Asterisk, one by one, the figures stepped forward. They placed their hands on Mara, not to bless, not to burden, but to return. A touch, a name, a voice, and then they faded, not away, into her. When the last disappeared, the wind exhaled. The book outside burst into flame, not destruction, ascension, and from its ashes, a new page rose, blank, until Mara stepped out of the circle, and across it, in a hand not hers, yet entirely hers, this was written. This was the final mass, not because the church has ended, but because it has finally remembered who it tried to forget. The stars above flickered, the dirt beneath her softened, and for the first time, Mara didn't feel chosen. She felt finished, whole, not because she survived, but because she finally became the vessel that didn't ask what came next, only carried what was lost back to where it belonged.